Welcome to Human. I'm Jessica McDonald, and today I have Natasha Sattler on the show. She is a writer, a producer, and a traveler, and she just released her new book, Shit Adults Never Taught Us, which we are chatting about in this episode. More specifically, the topics we're diving into include work crushes and how they're usually not real, and then we talk about how it actually does take courage to fall in love. It's important to embrace being alone, and we dive into a little bit of solo travel tips that Natasha has, and then we chat about how it's really important to catch yourself when you're falling in love with just the idea of someone. And then at the very end, we discuss overthinking and the importance of closing tabs in your mind. If you enjoy this episode, make sure you check out Shit Adults Never Taught Us. It is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple Books, and Google Play Books, and it's only $1.99 on Kindle on Amazon. So I recommend checking it out. It's definitely a book that you can pick up and put down whenever you please. And make sure you are subscribed to the show and you're staying tuned as there are solo episodes coming very soon. Thanks for listening. So today I'm here with Natasha Sattler, the author of Shit Adults Never Taught Us. Oh, before we even get into what this book is about, where is it available for people to purchase it?
You can buy it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple Books, and Google Play Books.
Okay, perfect. And so, first of all, I'm excited for how much we're likely going to swear throughout this entire episode.
Oh, so fucking much.
And so, Shit Adults Never Taught Us is a book that's a bit of a snapshot guide of what you didn't learn in school. So I just finished reading it. It was amazing. The chapters are short, they're very bite-sizable, and it's divided into 4 parts: career and money shit, relationship shit, mind shit, and life shit.
Yep, that's all the shit.
All the shit. And so what I really took away from this book is that you dive into all the shit that we wish people taught us and all the shit that we also wish we just didn't need to know, but need to just to live our lives. And so this ranges from being financially responsible, how to ask for a raise, how to leave your past in the past, travel tips you have, and so much more. And so I'm definitely most interested in diving into the relationship shit and the mind shit.
Yeah.
I love that.
That's the stuff everyone wants to talk about. And it's so funny because the career and money shit is really where I started with the book, because the book came to fruition because I was having conversations with friends and we were all like, how do we not know how to do this? It's so boring. I don't want to know how to do this. And I decided to make little bite-sized funny, use humor to tell a boring topic. So I use my own failures, my own experiences, and humor to infuse them. And then everybody reads them and they're like, yeah, that's great. Thank you. Now I know how to do that. But really what I want to talk about is the relationship and the mind stuff. And I'm like, yeah, okay, we could talk about all my failures there too.
Totally. Well, and yeah, before we dive into the relationship shit and the mind shit and all the failures and lessons that come with that, is the thing that was really cool for me with the financial and the money shit and the responsibility side of things is I actually, as I was reading your chapter all about how to ask for a raise, I asked for a raise at my job, and that was the first time I'd ever done that. It was so helpful to read about it while I was living it.
And you have a checklist at the end of a lot of those chapters where if you're like, okay, I read the chapter, I've got all 3 pages or whatever it was absorbed, I know it. And then you go into that meeting and you're like, you're like, I don't know what to do now. There's a checklist at the end to be like, okay, do this, then do this, then do this, and step through it. As opposed, I feel like every self-help book is just okay, here's a bunch of information. You think you get it, you put it down and you're like, oh crap, now what?
Yeah. And I've been saying this really a lot recently, is that learning the things you need to do is one thing. It's continually putting them into practice, making decisions that align with the goals and these self-help things you've learned that you want to put into practice.
Totally. And especially the relationship and the mind section, you're probably going to read it, absorb it, and then make that mistake again. And you'll have to read it and absorb it. And, that's life. Life is making mistakes a couple of times before you learn the lesson. And that's fine. It's totally normal to do it that way. But I feel like I've read a lot of books and they're like, great, now that you've read this book, you're a complete human being. Congratulations, you've graduated to a new level. And my life stays exactly the same. And I'm like, I don't think it worked for me. Everybody's raving about how great this book is. And I'm like, oh, wait, it's like therapy. It's not the actual book. It's when I apply the stuff to my life. And knowing that maybe you forget about it. You can read this book and then maybe forget about it for 6 months. And then something comes up in your life and you're like, oh, wait, hold on, let me go grab that. And then it's useful for you. It may not, I say it the front of the book, but I'm like, it's 98 chapters, but not all of them are going to be useful for you today, this week, this month, this year. Use what is, put it on a shelf, come back to it as you need it. Give it to a friend, share it around. It's meant to be like a community guide. It's not meant to be like, this is your life.
Because also, if you took everything you said and tried to put it into practice, like today, you'd be like, this is like years of shit you learned to do.
It would be the most overwhelming thing if you were like, okay, this is how I changed my life in 1 week. That would be insane. Do not do that.
Yeah, and something I love too is how you end it being like, okay, so you've learned the shit, now go fucking do it.
Yes, you've learned it. Put the book down. Because I was like, I feel like people are going to read it and exactly like every other self-help book, read it and be like, great, I've got it now. Fantastic. And I'm like, no, now go actually fucking do it. You can't just sit down and be like, well, I read a book. My life is better now. You actually have to do the stuff in the book.
Totally. So it's so interesting. I found when I was reading it, there was a lot of moments where I was like, oh, and I think you actually dive into this during the financial shit, work shit kind of beginning part is about work crushes and how you mentioned like you've had a crush at every job you've had. And when you spend like a certain amount of time with someone, it's natural to develop the crush.
But the crush most of the time isn't real. What it is I've developed a crush at every job I've ever been at because I spend 40, 50 hours a week with people. And that person is the most tolerable person in that time. So it's not even that like if I met them at a bar, I would like them. It's just that over time I have decided I hate them less than the other people or like, or they bother me less or I have less to vent about, or your brain is attracted to their work persona, to their creativity, to their drive, to them being in an element in a meeting. And like, there's usually a moment where you're like, oh my God, that person's really hot. And that moment is likely them exuding confidence. And when you realize like them in real life may not be that person, it's totally different. But regardless of whether or not you have the crush or the crush is real or whatever it is, don't date people at work. Like, you're just setting yourself up for the most horrible breakup in the history of your life because you break up and then your work friends have to choose sides or you have to leave or you choose to transfer to a different department to make things less awkward. And now you're impacting your own career and your own life and your own financial situation because you decide to date the person who sits nearest to you most days.
And yeah, of course you're going to like them in some way, shape, or form, especially if you can bitch about the annoying other coworkers you see every day.
Yes, absolutely. And I talk about it where I'm like, it's the same as school. Like when we were younger, we all got crushes because, you know, so-and-so was sitting next to us in homeroom and one day he wore a really cute shirt. And I'm like, yes, but would you have had a crush on him if he didn't sit next to you every day for a whole year? Maybe, but probably not. And so work is the same thing. It's just now we get to be more in our element and we're more ourselves and we can date in like adult ways. Go out, find somebody else. And I say if you leave a job outside of this realm, if you leave a job because you got a promotion somewhere else or whatever it is, and a month goes by and you still really have a crush on this person, reach out, of course. Go date that person. Now it isn't awkward. Now you're not in that weird situation of like, oh, if we break up, this is going to be the most uncomfortable work scenario because you work somewhere else or they work somewhere else. So
for sure,
give it time. We live in a generation right now where nobody stays at their job for 30, 40 years anymore. Like, give it time.
That's
in a couple of years,
true.
In a couple of years, you'll be able to date that person. It's fine.
Yeah. Well, and it's great also to think like, okay, if I were to meet them at a bar, if I were to hang out with them outside of work, would I actually like them? Or you start dating them and you work with them, then you're going to see them outside work. Then they're going to be like the only person you see ever.
Right. You see them at work. You see them at home. You see them in your free time on the weekends. All of your friends are combined. All of your work friends are combined. Everybody's combined. I mean, my God, why would I want that?
Yeah, which is great. I just found it was like a snap to reality being like, oh, this is something other people experience too. Like this isn't actually, it doesn't need to be a real crush.
It doesn't. And when you realize that it's probably just a work crush and it's not a real crush, when you leave, it'll likely fade. Over a couple of weeks, it'll likely fade. And if it doesn't, like I said, reach out. But I think for most of the time, it's going to fade because your life moves on and therefore your crush kind of fades in the background with that job.
Yeah,
like
for
all
sure.
encompassed. Yeah.
100%. I love that. So, kind of moving on to more real crushes and like
Yeah.
actually falling in love. One of the quotes you have in the book is you say, "It takes courage to give someone the ability to know you completely and to crush you undeniably."
Yes. It's
And
true.
this is huge. I think, especially after experiencing a heartbreak or leaving a relationship, choosing to walk into something new and be completely yourself and know that you can get totally crushed is something that's hard to do.
Love takes a lot of courage, especially after you've been heartbroken again and again. Like we have a tendency to close ourselves off a little bit because every heartbreak is like we shared a piece of ourselves and somebody decided to deny that piece of ourselves. And so we sort of close off a little bit. And love, no matter what form it comes in, takes courage. It's a risk, it's a verb, it's very active. It's not something that happens to you. And if you're a person that takes things very, very hard, if you take things on a lot and you are unwilling to move forward past heartbreak, if you stay in the past, if you can't move past like that weird little bubble after a breakup where you're stuck in this limbo, then you're going to have a hard time falling in love again. It really does take courage. And a lot of people say that they've never been in love. And I really think it is just because of courage. They're like, oh, I've never been in love. I've never found the right person. I'm like, maybe you have found the right person, but you didn't deep dive. You didn't let them really in and you closed yourself off for, it could be any number of reasons. And the courage wasn't there. It wasn't that the love wasn't there. It was that courage wasn't there. You weren't willing to give a part of yourself to another person.
Mm-hmm.
And it's incredibly vulnerable. Vulnerability is one of the hardest things humans deal with. And it's incredibly vulnerable to give yourself to another person and be like, okay, here's me, here's all of me. You see 100% of what I'm about. And now you decide whether or not that's a person you want to date. Like, that's so scary.
Yeah,
It takes courage.
I was just listening to a podcast actually this morning about it's easier to accept rejection from someone when you put on a bit of a facade and you're not fully yourself because you're like, oh, well, they rejected that version of me that isn't completely who I really am.
Exactly. And that's sort of like the first date, right? Like the first date, you're putting on your best outfit, your best whatever. And when you get rejected, you're like, oh, well, they didn't get to see my funny side. They didn't get to see my party side. They didn't get to see this sensitive side or whatever. But when you've been with somebody for a few months and they really have seen all the sides of you and then they reject you, that's far more vulnerable. That's what really takes courage because it's harder to be like, oh, well, they saw all of me and that's when they decided to leave.
Well, and that's the part that I think, yeah, is definitely the hardest to recover from and put yourself out there again. But I think everything comes with time and talking about it and choosing to put yourself out there again.
Right, because what that's saying is I showed somebody all of me and that wasn't a match. That person
Yeah.
wasn't right for me because they saw all of me and they were like, no. And heartbreak really is truly like a breaking of your heart. It is your soul. It is all of what makes you you. So if all of what makes you you is something that person doesn't align with, that isn't your person. So keep
Hmm.
looking. That's almost like, okay, I took a lesson, I grew from it. Awesome. Now I get to go back out and find the person that is right for me. A lot
Yeah.
of people take heartbreak as like, oh, my life is over. I won't find anybody. And that's totally not what it is. What it is, okay, now I get to take the lessons that I learned from this relationship. I learned more about me and what I want and what I need in a relationship. And now I get to go out there and I get to talk to other people, meet other people, date other people, fall in love with other people who are more aligned with what I need and what I now know about myself. That's
Hmm.
really cool.
Yeah, and I think it takes being alone too. And you talk about this, how like the first time you went to a restaurant by yourself was when you were like 27 and traveled alone and started to do that stuff is when you're in your late 20s.
Yeah, I was in a relationship for most of my 20s. I met him when I was 19, I think he was 20, and we broke up just a month shy of me turning 28.
Wow.
And most of my 20s was spent in a relationship with part of my identity was that I was a part of a relationship. I was half of a relationship. And when I became single, it felt so lonely. It felt like I don't know, like I had to become a different person, like I had to evolve into a different person, where really all it was is this circumstance had changed. I didn't change. I had always been me. And nobody's ever going to be able to take that away from me, regardless of how many relationships I'm in my life. But it felt like I had to become a different person, because part of my identity in your 20s when you're growing was defined by a relationship in another person. And when I figured out who I was, and the parts of me that didn't involve him and the parts of me that I needed to redefine, all of that came from doing things alone and being okay, just sitting and being and traveling alone and eating alone and taking myself out on little dates. And it's like, you go out on dates to figure out if you like another person. Why don't you go out on dates and see how much you like you?
Yeah, I love that. And it's interesting. I feel like right now I'm experiencing the reverse, where I've been single for about 2 years now, and I've gotten much more comfortable as the time has gone on, being alone and spending a lot of time alone, especially in the pandemic too, when we can't do much. And
Right.
now I'm doing a bit of online dating and talking to people, and I'm like, wait, this feels weird I feel like I need to be someone else when I'm talking to someone else, and like having someone text me all the time. I'm like, oh, I'm not used to that.
Yes, absolutely. And you've gotten so used to you that you're like, I don't need another person. Another person's just like a bonus. They're just like a plus in your life, but you don't need another person because you've proven to yourself that like you. You'll be fine as you. You don't need somebody to like, what is it, complete you? Whatever the
Yeah.
Jerry Maguire line is, like you completely, you don't need that. You just a plus. It's genuinely just a bonus to have another person to experience things and share things with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it does take that time alone yeah, I've gone to restaurants by myself, but doing it the first couple times is awkward. And even, it doesn't even matter how many times you've done it. It feels weird because you're like, nope, just a table for one, please. And
Table
you're
for
just,
one. Yeah. And if you take it a little step further, you could always go to a restaurant and sit at the bar and talk to people and meet people and know that you'll probably never see those people again, or sit at the restaurant without your phone or without a book, just literally sit and eat. Like you can take it a little bit further if you wanted to. I've done all those things, and trust me, they just get more uncomfortable, but it's a good uncomfortable. It's the kind of uncomfortable where you learn something about yourself you wouldn't have known otherwise.
yeah. And then you have great people watching too.
Oh yeah. And you like meet people you never would have before. Like if you go with people, you're never going to talk to the guy sitting next to you at a bar or the person next to you at a table. If you are on your phone the whole time, you're not approachable. You might end up talking to the bartender. You might end up talking to, the hostess for a while. It doesn't matter who you talk to. It's just a genuine human connection that you wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. It's such a great point. And you mentioned that a lot in terms of solo travel as well, and the amount you can grow and change. It's interesting.
Yeah.
You're my third author on the show, and the first one I had, she wrote Eat, Pray, FML and talks like all about solo travel. And that's when I was like, whoa. And I feel like we're coming full circle now, like talking about your solo travels as well.
It's so great. And I didn't start solo traveling until 2 or 3 years ago. And when I started, I did like a mini trip. I went to Seattle and later on Vancouver. And my trip to Seattle was like 48 hours, 72 hours. And I jam packed it so much that like I was sleeping like 5, 6 hours a night because I was like, okay, so I'm going to go see this and this and this. I put like a week of things into a weekend. And when I got back, I was like, that was amazing. I loved it so much. And then it took me time to realize really what I did was I jam packed my activities so that I was never bored. I was never lonely. I was never scared. I was just going, 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 going. And so the next trip that I went on, I did something similar where I wrote out a list of activities that I really wanted to do and really wanted to see, but I didn't plan every minute. And I would just sit in the moments where it was like, I have an hour and I don't know what to do. And this is uncomfortable. And you just sit in that and you're like, okay, but that's because I'm on vacation alone. I don't know anybody. My friends aren't here. My family isn't here. Like I'm not surrounded by things I know. I maybe don't even speak the language. And you get so much more comfortable in that than when you go home and you're bored and you don't have a jam-packed schedule and your friends aren't available, you're fine. And
Yeah.
like, you're like, I've done this before. I did this really hard in another country where I didn't know anybody. Like I can do this at home.
Yeah, totally. And I love like so much that you dive into the book too about you. It doesn't need to be some grand traveling adventure. You can go with the budget you have and do a little
Yeah.
weekend trip like that or go somewhere close to you and just experience traveling by yourself. It's just such a new thing to do.
And people are saying, like, oh, well, I don't have enough money. I don't have enough time. I don't have this. I don't have that. I have to wait till my friends are available. I have to wait till I'm in a relationship. Like, I was just talking to somebody who was like, I've always wanted to go to Paris, but Paris is so romantic. I want to go on a vacation when I'm in a relationship. And I was like, well, you could do that too. But why would you deny yourself Paris? Paris is not something you go to once. You're allowed to go back. So
Yeah.
why don't you go now by yourself? And then when you meet somebody, you can go again. But what if you hate it? Like, what if you don't like it? And then you've built it up so much to go in a relationship and it's disappointing.
Yeah, 100%. That's crazy. I love that you're like, yeah, you can go multiple times. And
You're
I
allowed.
think, yeah, building it up to this big romantic thing, I think you would end up going with whoever you're in a relationship with eventually. And then that's kind of like you're sitting TikTok being like, I want to go to Paris, but I need to have a boyfriend for it.
Right. And then what if you just get in a relationship just so you can go to Paris and that person
Yeah,
is not right for you? Like putting
exactly.
pressures on, I have to do this blank when I'm in a relationship means you're probably going to get in a relationship faster than you would otherwise, or with the wrong person because you're just checking off boxes. Like,
Yes,
I have a lot
100%.
of
Yeah.
friends, and I'm in my 30s, and I have a lot of friends who just want to get married. And I feel like they're like, okay, I'm in my 30s now, and I just want to get married. And I'm like, but do you actually love that person, or are you just getting married because you want to be married? Like, that's
Just
how
crazy.
divorces happen.
Yeah, like you're going to be with them forever.
Yeah.
Crazy. And so that even comes to something I have struggled with a lot that you talk about is falling in love with someone as who they are now, not
Yes.
who, you expect them to be or you even wrote, I expect someone to or I maybe I even took this away from it that like I realized like I'll expect someone to do the things for me that I'll do for them. And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh, that's not at all how relationships work. Everybody shows up in different ways."
Absolutely. And yes, it's you're expecting people to treat you the way you would treat them, and that's not always a possibility for somebody. Some people aren't capable of that. Some people are going to show up differently and disappoint you. And if you're holding them to the same expectations of what you would do for them, you might be disappointed. And if you're having a conversation with somebody who keeps being like, I want to do this, or I will do this, or I'm going to start doing this, and then they don't do those things, but in your head, you're like, well, when they start doing those things, then this is going to be a great relationship. They may never do that. Or you may be like, okay, well, they're young now. When they grow up, they'll be more mature, or anything. If you're like, what, I can't wait for this person to start making more money and get a job, or whatever it is, they may never get a job. Who knows? Fall in love with who the person is now, or find somebody who you can fall in love with now. But if
Yeah.
you're falling in love with the idea of what a relationship could be, you're just going to disappoint yourself. And
Mhm.
it's not going to disappoint the other person, but you are stringing them along knowing that this might not work out. You're really just going to disappoint yourself because you're letting yourself down from a fantasy that was never a reality.
Yes, 100%. I have struggled with that in honestly every stage of a relationship. At the beginning, at the talking stage,
Yeah.
I'm the biggest culprit for the like fantasizing of what the relationship could be or who they might be at the beginning. But it even made me think about my ex relationship. Near the end of it, we would have a lot of fights, and he would keep saying, "I'm going to change," or "I'm going to do this," or "I'm going to do that." And finally, I was like, "Look at the past 2 years. We've been having similar fights, and they've never changed." I am
Yeah.
gonna go based off of who you are right now and what this is right now, and I can't be in this relationship anymore.
And it's true. Like when you start dating, everybody's their best selves. And so you're imagining what it would be like. You're imagining the future of that relationship based on those first few best dates. And that's fine because that's what everybody does. Everybody goes into a relationship with the best version of themselves. But then as time goes on, if somebody's like, I want to change for you, I want to do these things for you, people don't change for other people. They change for themselves. But if you're holding out on this relationship being like, okay, I'll stay with this person because they swear they're going to change for me, they swear they're going to do these things, give them the opportunity to make changes for themselves. But if not, if that's a deal breaker for you, recognize that that's probably not going to change. And there is a very real possibility that who you are with right now is who you're going to be with.
Hmm.
Don't put all your eggs in the basket of the future. like live in the reality of what's happening in the present. And if that's not something you're happy with, why would you sacrifice your present self for your potential future self? That's
Yeah.
not fun. And your future self's really going to be mad at you for doing that.
For
I
sure.
also, there's the what's below that section in the book. I don't know if you read that chapter as well, but that is essentially this what you were just talking about of having the same fight for 2 years, where like you could have the same fight for 2 years because you're not having the real fight. You're having the surface layer fight, but then the fight below it is the one you actually need to have. And the what's below that chapter, I use the example of like you're fighting because, somebody didn't do the dishes and then they didn't do the laundry and they said that they would take your car to get an oil change and they didn't do it or whatever. Really, the fight you're having is I feel like I'm putting more effort into this relationship than you are, or I feel like my needs aren't being met, or I feel like you're giving me promises that you're not fulfilling. And that's the fight you need to be having as opposed to the surface level fights. And then maybe you have that fight and something good comes out of it. And then you need to go a layer deeper where you're like, you're breaking promises to me. And the layer below that is, I feel like you don't care about me as much as I care about you, or whatever that is. You got to keep digging a little bit deeper. And when you get to the fight that's actually bothering you, the real fight, that's the one that's going to get you somewhere. It's the one you move forward from. It's the one you grow together from.
Hmm.
Those surface level fights, you solve that one issue and then it pops up in a different place. It's like that whack-a-mole game.
Yeah. That's such a great way to put it. And I think another point you touch on, I'm like, how did you put these into different topics of chapters? Because everything that you bring up is so intertwined. But that's the beauty of life, right?
They're all intertwined. And that's sort of how it happened is I wrote the first few chapters and then I would go from that chapter to something else. And I'd be like, oh, wait, I got to talk about that too. Oh, wait, I got to talk about that. Oh, and that. And it's funny because like you're not the same person every day. You're not in the same mood every day. You don't have the same experiences. Your days are different. And I would write a chapter and then I would think about it. And the next day I would think about it. And it would be a totally different day, totally different mood, emotional state, circumstance, whatever. And I'd be like, oh, wait, now I got to talk about this. Like, it's almost like a launching off point. And that's why they're all so intertwined. It's like your life is intertwined. You're never one thing, you're never one moment. Like, everything
Yeah.
sort of intertwines. All the
Yeah.
relationship stuff affects your mental health, your career affects your mental health, your all the life chapters, the miscellaneous life chapters are all intertwined with all of the others. They're all based on your relationships, your circumstances financially, your career, all of that. Of course, it's intertwined because your life is dependent on your money, your mental health, your relationships, romantic or otherwise. All of your whole life is intertwined because it's what makes you you.
And I love to hear that too, because I am definitely guilty of coming into like an all or nothing mindset, or I love balance. I think we all do, of course, and everything's intertwined, right? But sometimes I'll be
Oh,
like, oh, I
yeah.
need to go full force with this one thing. When in reality, I love you also mention like closing tabs. Like you don't need to be the best activist for every single problem because then you're just going to drive yourself crazy.
The internet makes you think you do, though.
Yeah.
You think like you're a bad person if you don't care about everything right now because everybody else does. So closing tabs comes in a couple different ways. Closing tabs comes in the internet makes you feel like you have to care about everything right now. You don't. You can care about the things that you actually care about and you let your friends care about the other things. Or closing tabs comes from I have to do this today and this and this and this and this and this and then like if you're like me, you're like washing dishes on 4 hours of sleep and it's like midnight and you won't go to bed because you can't go to bed with a dirty sink and you're like, you got to close some tabs. Like this can wait until tomorrow. This you will not die if you have a couple of cups in your dish or dishes in your sink. You will survive this. And if you're like me and you're a perfectionist and you're somebody who really can't sleep unless everything is cleared off of your to-do list, we have to reassess why that is. That's a level of anxiety. It's a deeper rooted issue. And when you start addressing what that mental mind shit is, then you're able to sort of calm that down and your tabs naturally close. You don't have to care about everything today. You don't have to deal with everything today. Your to-do list is there to keep you busy. It's not there to drive you crazy.
Yeah, 100%. Like I even had a conversation with my dad a couple months ago where I said something about being overwhelmed by my to-do list and he was like, well, the day you don't have anything on your to-do list, you're dead. Your life, you're constantly
You're
gonna
done.
have things to do.
You're done. And I think people keep things on their to-do list that they're never going to do. And I have that section on breaking down things that overwhelm you too. Like, I mean, how many people have made the same New Year's resolution for the past 10 years? How many people have been like, I'm going to lose weight? You can't just put lose weight on a to-do list. Like, lose weight is not an actionable item. You can put in January, I'm going to go to the gym 5 times and I'm going to cut out soda. And in February, it's going to be 7 times. And I'm going to cut out candy or sugar or whatever. And that is actionable. That is something you can actually do. Lose weight, or, I mean, like, write a book. I can't just put, like, write a book on my to-do list. That's never going to happen. Like,
That'll be on your to-do list for years and years, and you'll be so daunted by it that you'll never even start.
and you just leave it there. It just, like, stares you, like, when are you going to do this? And there's things on my to-do list that I do that with. I'm like, just leave it. Like, we talked about travel. I have bucket list places that I'm like, yeah, I'll get there. But exactly, like, if you have nowhere left that you want to travel, you've seen the whole world, well, there goes the excitement of travel. Like, the excitement of travel is going somewhere that you want to see and do. And that's half of the trip. That's half of the excitement, I think, is planning it and getting excited about it and looking forward to it. And if you've seen everything and done everything, why on earth would you keep doing it?
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. Wow, there's just so much good shit.
Thank you. So much good shit. And it's shit that I've dealt with, but that I'm still dealing with. There's so many lessons
Yeah.
in this book that it's like, yeah, I wrote it down because I've lived it, but I'm still learning that lesson myself.
100%. And that even takes me to in mind shit. You talk about how the only way to get through it is to swim through it, to do it, to swim. You have to just dive into it.
Yeah, you can get really paralyzed by things like anxiety or depression or any feelings that are overwhelming that are too much for you to handle. You can get really paralyzed by it. And I'm the kind of person who likes to not feel bad things. I'm the kind of person who will be like, okay, Natasha, that's really dumb. Don't feel that. You are just living your life, and sometimes you have bad days. So don't worry about it. Just move past it. And I will, like, suppress any bad feelings because I don't want to feel that way instead of actually working through it. I'll think my way out of it. It's almost like trying to, like, fast answer it. It's using the intellectual to fix the emotional, and that doesn't work. Where, yeah, you have to learn to swim through it, because if you're just sort of thinking your way out of it, you're just treading water, you're just standing still, you're not doing anything. But if you swim through it, you actually get to the other side and you're so much better. You're healthier. Your
Mhm.
mind doesn't have to do all that extra work of thinking through it because you felt through it.
Yeah, and if you don't feel through it, like it's gonna come up in the future. It's gonna keep coming up and keep coming up until
Yep.
you
And
swim through it.
in tons of different ways and in ways that you never thought it would. And you're like, why on earth am I sitting on the floor crying at 10 p.m.? My day was fine. And you're like, oh, it's that shit I didn't deal with last week. That's what it is.
Yeah, totally. And I think that even translates to like overthinking as well and feeling the need to control the future. And I have found personally that I will get so stressed out and so anxious, wanting to know exactly what's going to happen. But the way I've learned to feel the most peace is actually in accepting the present, accepting the unknown, knowing that right now is all I have. So that's what I'm going to try and embrace and live in.
I am the biggest overthinker, the biggest catastrophic thinker I think I've ever met. Because, I mean, I'm in my own head, so it's the only one I know. But
Yeah.
overthinking, if overthinking burnt calories, I would be like a supermodel, because all I do is like think of every scenario, every worst case option, every outcome, every problem that doesn't exist, and then the solution for that problem. Like, I am the kind of person that has problems created just because my brain's bored. And if that sounds like you, congratulations, you're also an overthinker. I have a couple of tools in the book on how to help with overthinking, but I think it's gonna, like you said, it's gonna pop up in different ways if we don't handle the emotional capacity or the emotional aspect of it underneath, because overthinking really is just an emotional response. It's your brain's stress, anxiety, feeling overwhelmed, all of that is coming out intellectually, it's coming out in your thoughts. And if you handle the anxiety, the overthinking does subside.
hmm Yeah, and it's crazy that like our brain will try and predict, like you said, all the possible problems that will arise and all the solutions. When in reality, that's not protecting us from the actual problems that will come up because we will deal with them then. When real problems do arise, our brain will figure it out, but it's a bit of a
Yeah.
waste of our present moment and our headspace and our energy and our anxiety to be like, okay, well, if this happened, this is what I'll do. If this happened, this is what I'll do, when none of it's
Yes.
happened.
None of it's happened. You're worrying about fake problems and real problems, exactly. Real problems are going to come up, but you don't know what they are yet. And you're solving fantasy problems. Who wants to solve fantasy problems? Who wants to spend all of their energy and time worrying about things that aren't real?
Yeah, something that I found has helped me as well is I will like make like a scheduled time to worry. Like if I feel like I'm having a super like stressful week or something, I'll be like, okay, today I'm like sitting and I'm trying to do work, but all these thoughts keep coming up that I'm stressing out about. I'll be like, okay, at 1 p.m., I'm gonna sit and I'm gonna write for 20 minutes. I'm gonna write out everything I'm stressing out about, and usually it helps me come to some sort of like conclusion of how to just get my brain to shut the fuck up.
Yeah, that's meditation. That is essentially meditation. Meditation, for so many people, people seem to think it's like clearing your brain, clearing your mind. I don't know where that came from. You can't clear your mind. But really all meditation is letting your brain think through all the things you're like, I don't have time to think about that. Oh, don't have time to think about that. Don't want to think about that right now. Nope, don't have time for that. And it's just sitting and letting your brain think all the things you've been suppressing for this day, this week, this month, and working through it in a way where you don't judge it, you don't try and redirect it, you don't try and shut it down, you just let the thoughts come, you let the thoughts go. And if that comes in the form of writing, even better, because it's something you're like physically doing. But no, meditation is genuinely just sitting and thinking the things that you don't let yourself think the rest of the day.
Yeah, and that's crazy because I think there's so much like assumption about what meditation is, like in the form of like society will say like, oh no, meditation is sitting and breathing in silence. When really for a lot of people that's not a helpful way for them to work through what's going on in their brain.
And if people have real lives, when on earth do you ever have time to sit in silence? I mean, maybe during quarantine, sure, there was a little bit of silence, but if like you have kids at home or you live in a house with a part or an apartment building or you live in a city or you have roommates or any of that, when are you ever around silence and when do you ever have 20, 30 minutes where like you can sit perfectly silent unless it's the middle of the night? That's never going to happen. Meditation is really just letting it's about you. It's not about anybody else. It's not about the perfect surroundings, environment, circumstance. It's not about any of that. It's about you just letting you work through stuff that you're like, nah, I don't have time to deal with that right now. Make
Mm-hmm.
some time. If it's at 1 p.m. and all it is 20 minutes where you write, there you go. You got it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's awesome. I love
It's
it.
funny that like we judge every part of our life and then we even judge meditation, which is just supposed to help us with our judging of every part of our life that's causing anxiety. And we're like, my anxiety, I can't fix my anxiety the perfect way. So I'm just going to cause more anxiety by judging the way that I want to fix it.
That's actually so true. It's ridiculous. It's crazy what we do to ourselves.
We're really hard on ourselves. I think for me, myself, I'm the biggest critic of myself. Like anybody can judge me, but they're never going to judge me harder than I judge myself. And that's, probably true for a lot of people. And once you just give yourself some slack, let yourself feel whatever you want to feel, think whatever you want to think, and then just realize you're just a human. You're just going through human stuff. Like I would never judge people in my life that I love and care about the way I judge myself. And what is that saying to me? That I don't love and care about myself the way I care about other people? That's not cool. Like you got to judge yourself with the same empathy, the same compassion that you give to other people because you're just as human as they are.
100%. Wow. I love that I like came on the show and talked about all of this because there's just so many incredible tidbits from this book. I love how you say like some of it, not all of it will work for you right now. You can put it on your bookshelf, you can give it to a friend because I think this is a book you could read every month, every couple months. Tomorrow, like a chapter will reach you in different ways depending on where you're at in your life.
Yeah, and if you are a bad reader like me, like I declare myself a bad reader who will pick up a book and then put it down and then grab four more books and read a couple chapters and put them down. This is the perfect book for you because you're not supposed to read it cover to cover and it's not going to sit on your bookshelf like haunting you all the time. Like all these books behind me, I've read like half of them. But I think what it is a lot of people get a book and they're like, I don't have time to read a book right now. You don't need time to read this book. You need 10 minutes when you're struggling with a problem and you need help, pick it up, spend the 10 minutes reading the chapter, let it help you or guide you. I don't really love the term self-help, but if you can use it as a self-guide, then just let it guide you through a certain issue and then put it back. It doesn't need to be a book that you like use as a task and read cover to cover. It's not meant to be that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the most incredible things about this book and about books with similar premises is that, yeah, it's not a start to finish, a storyline you need to follow or something you need to like put pressure on yourself to read the whole thing. You can read what resonates and,
Absolutely.
you know, skip what doesn't and go back later if it does feel good for you.
Absolutely, because not every moment in your life is going to be applicable to every chapter or half the chapters, or you might only need 3 chapters right now, and that's great because next month you might need 3 more. Next year, you might need to reread the first 3 because they didn't stick, and that's okay. Again, that's part of being human. That's fine.
For sure. That's amazing. And I want to also close out with this quote that I took that I think is probably my favorite in the book, where you say, tomorrow's never guaranteed and money always returns. Time never does.
It's very true. So use your time wisely today.
Yeah. So go fucking do it. Go. You're not listening to this. Go do it.
Just fucking do it. Just go buy the book and then just fucking do it.
What a perfect way to like sum it up and put a bow on it. I love it. Thank you so much for being here. It was so fun to have this conversation. And I feel like so much of the book came to life for me. Thank you. Thank you so much. This was amazing. Good. Okay. So where can people also follow you? You can reiterate where they can find the book as well. Absolutely. So you can follow me on Instagram at Shit Adults Never Taught Us. And you can find the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple Books, and Google Play Books. Perfect. Thanks so much for listening to the episode. Make sure you're following our podcast Instagram at Human to Human Pod, and you're following me at Jessica J. McDonald. And please leave a review if you enjoyed the show on Apple Podcasts and subscribe so you don't miss when they drop every Tuesday. We will be switching gears for the show. There's going to be one more guest that comes on for a little different interview where I actually answer questions about myself, the podcast, how I came to be where I am. So that should be coming out next week. And then we'll be taking a bit of time off as we switch to solo episodes. As well, there will be a survey being put out onto my Instagram account that my team member actually made to kind of gather some information about the podcast. So please make sure you go fill out that survey if you have not already, and stay tuned because the show is about to get a lot more interesting as we dive into a lot more specific topics. See you soon.